All right, guys, we are officially recording, and I'm going to add closed captions and use a third party. And no, we're not. We're not going to do that. All right, because I don't have the stuff ready to go. Well, thanks. I'm not sure who all is here. Is it just 4 or 5 of us still here?
Looks like some folks are rolling in right now.
So we'll give them a few more minutes to roll in. So maybe 2 or 3 more minutes. I see Lonnie. Lonnie is one of our faculty members here at UCCS, and Alex, and I'm guessing some students are joining us. So we'll give them a couple more minutes.
Hey, jackass, you're ruining the show here. Oh, what a shame. You forgetting about somebody?
Well, that's where you come in, sweetheart. I need you to take care of it, but do it quietly.
Do it quietly. Yeah. Are you sure about this?
That's what time's right.
What does that mean?
How much trouble could one girl be in?
Hey, Richard, buddy, I think that you're on. You're not
sorry
muted.
about that.
There we go. There we go. I was wondering, is there a joke going on that I didn't know about or something there? I suppose there could have been. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm not sure who else is going to join us here today, but thanks to those of you who are online. I'm Sean Williams. Most of you probably know me. I'm the director of the Technical Writing, Technical Communication Information Design program at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I am not in Colorado Springs as we talk. I'm somewhere in an undisclosed location north of Denver because I had a meeting up here. Couldn't make it back to the Springs in time. So little shout out to my hosts, Blake and Lindsay here, who are letting me crash in one of their bedrooms. And so thanks to Blake and Lindsay. Also, today we have Brian Verhoeven and Kathy Jeep, 2 very experienced professionals, probably 15, 16 years or so working in UX and technical communication and instructional design. And they're going to share some of their wisdom with us today. For those of you who are out there in Zoom land, please remember to mute your microphones and turn off your cameras. If you do have a question, please go ahead and type that in the chat, and we'll monitor that chat, and I'll pose those questions or weave those questions in to the best of my ability as we go along. So again, thanks for attending. This is Open Hour with TCID at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. Our guests today are Brian Verhoeven, Kathy Jeep. And so I just want to start talking a little bit about your backgrounds. Kathy, Brian, tell us a little bit. We'll start with you, Kathy. Tell us a little bit about your pathway. How did you arrive where you are now?
I have a very winding path to a certain extent. When I started graduate school, which is where I met you, Sean, I thought I wanted to work in a usability lab. That was what a career path I thought I wanted to take. And then I graduated and started down a different road and went into instructional design and started that way.
And
where are you now? I'm now a user experience researcher in healthcare. I work for Availity. So I'm still new. I'm about 2 months in, so I don't have the whole spiel down just yet. But we sit between insurance payers and providers, and they can go in and check benefits and file claims and things like that. So.
Okay, excellent. How about you, Brian? Tell us a little bit about your pathway. I mean, how did you get to where you are now?
It all started with a woman. I met this pretty woman at Virginia Tech, and to give me purpose, I decided I needed to take an internship up in DC. That's when I moved from poetry over to design, business writing through a marketing agency. And then I got a job right after Virginia Tech, again, to stay an extra year to be with my wife. And then kind of just applied to Clemson, met Kathy and Sean in grad school, worked together. And then after that, I moved back to the DC area where my wife is from and did some consulting work for a bunch of federal agencies. And then I went to work at the Washington Post as an interaction designer, and then went and kind of did some more agency work, we were calling ourselves information architects back that long ago. We would call it user experience design now. Kind of moved my way into management at that second agency. And now I work for Morningstar, which is a financial services company. I've held a number of different roles here. I think, Kathy, we all have winding paths in the user experience world.
Well, let's talk a little bit about these different roles that you mentioned. So Brian and Kathy, you mentioned interaction design, user experience design, instructional design. What do you see as the differences, the overlap among these different perspectives, these different positions that you have held? Start with you, Brian.
Well, I think in the beginning, it was about trying to figure out what to call ourselves, right? Like information architecture, where we were trying to focus in on the structure of information, really, and the wayfinding. And then there was other groups that came out of that, like content strategists, trying to differentiate ourselves from the traditional graphic designers a little bit. And now I see what the industry is doing is moving back towards more umbrella terms like product designers, where we expect you to have interaction design skills, have user experience skills, information architecture skills, content strategy, all rolled into one. And obviously different designers are going to have different strengths under that umbrella, but it's just much more efficient to move back towards generalization rather than specialization. The differences under the umbrella, IA, information architecture, is about structure. Interaction design is about the conversation you're having with the interface. Content strategy is about content structure and content delivery. And then user experience is this mythical thing that we think we can actually control, but the users control everything.
What do you think, Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Brian. I think for the roles that I've held, I think the common thread is really that we're trying to help people. I mean, at the very basic root, instructional design, it's more, let me help you skill up or learn what you need to do to be successful in the job. And then now it's more in a user experience role, I feel more like, let me help you be successful with this particular thing that you're using, whether it's an application or site or whatever. But it really comes down to helping people. I mean, at the core, and understanding them in order to help them better, and not assuming that you know what they need, because you're usually not right.
You as the designer usually aren't right.
Yeah.
But
No.
what do you think are some of the challenges? You know, so you guys have been doing this a long time, and to where you've gotten now, what are some of the challenges you faced over the course of the last 10, 12, 15 years as you evolved into your current role? Go ahead, Kathy.
Tough question. I think understanding those users that I'm talking, or the people, I'm not sure how I feel about the term user sometimes, because it kind of makes people sound, it kind of flattens them out a little bit. They're people. And that do more than just the part that, sorry, I see the fly.
I know, I'm trying. Yeah, I'm trying.
Trying to
I'm not trying to
understand
pull
them.
my
I think that's the
here and have the
biggest.
fly land on my head. Yeah.
I think that's always been the biggest challenge for me, has been trying to get access to the people and figure out how to understand them better. And access has always been, and as instructional design, I felt like I was a little bit further removed in a lot of the corporate instructional design job. We were kind of asked to make learning and content that was all things to all people, but all these people did so many different things, and we were watering things down so much that it was, instead of being really effective for one group of people, we were making things that were not really quite effective for a whole bunch of people. And so that's kind of, I don't know, been a challenge for me, trying to really hone in on how can we help a specific group of people and not just always try to do everything for everybody, because that's really hard to do.
I think, just riffing on what you're saying, Kathy, I think that both the understanding of people getting access, that's been kind of a current theme throughout my career. Different projects, different companies, you'll have easier access to your customers or your buyers or the people that need to engage with your software. I totally agree with you. There's only two types of users: what software engineers call the people that use their software, and drug users. So I don't like that term either. I try to think about it in terms of our personas or customers and buyers. And usually where I sit, those are the two main differences because we're in a B2B2C environment right now. I think the access has been challenging at times, especially the more specialized audiences that you go after, like if you're in healthcare, doctor's time is really valuable. So if you're trying to design something for them, that could be difficult. In my case, currently, advisor's time is really valuable. So you want to make the most of your time and make sure that you're getting valuable information back to your designs. And I think, over the arc of the last 15 years or so, when I first started, the other challenge was like designers trying to explain what it is that we do and why we need to talk to customers and get that in, and then, like do this discovery process. I think that's less so now. There's still challenges and it's less so now. But it's been an interesting journey to kind of come in after the first .com boom and bust. And now working in software, I think that people value design, but they're still a little skeptical at times because it's hard. We were chatting before this. It's hard to measure what we do. And especially in qualitative and quantitative ways, to speak the language of the business. Like that's the hardest part I've seen as designers coming up. As you get more mature in your career, you're starting to take these fuzzy concepts like empathy for your customer and translate them into things that matter to a CEO, revenue, marketing, qualified marketing leads, like these things that you don't learn about as a designer.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting. Kathy, what do you think are some of the, and so Brian, you were talking just a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the way the evolution has changed. And Kathy, in your 15 years or so, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced as the field has evolved and changed? I mean, other than access to participants, users, customers, people.
Yeah, Brian touched on this a little bit. It's becoming more known as a field. I think back when we were in school, I don't remember if UX was really a common term at that point. It was user-centered design and like usability, and it was stuff that people did in labs. That's what the job I thought I wanted to have. I'm glad I didn't do that because that's totally not what the field looks like today. But people are becoming more aware of it and interested in it, but they're not quite really sure how to interact with it and how it really fits into all of this other stuff that this engine we have going on about revenue and business and, these metrics that people are looking at, like the business terms you need to know about, we really comes down to it. We really care about earnings per share, So like, well, how does me caring about what you do impact the numbers that my shareholders care about, that part, I feel like we're getting there. If somebody says user experience or UX, I think we're more likely now for somebody to go, oh yeah, I've heard of that. And I kind of know what it is, but not as much on I can't quite see the application just yet. I think that's where we kind of are right now, how to translate all of that in a good way that means something to the rest of the business. I don't know, Brian, you might have I think we've talked about this before too, a different perspective on that.
I don't know. I would think it's fairly aligned with what you're saying. I think that, for perspective for folks on the call, when Kathy and I were in graduate school together, we were reading The Elements of User Experience by Jesse James Garrett. That book came out maybe 2 or 3 years before we were in grad school. And he just published an article recently that kind of is suggesting that we're going full circle. There's this UX is theater where people are doing all the steps of UX, but they're not really changing the way they work in meaningful ways. It's kind of, he called it theater. And I think that people are aware of it, even going all the way back, like to IBM in good design is good business, right? And the company I worked for in 1984 is when we were founded, and Joe Mansueto, our chairman, has been investing in design since the very beginning, like that was part of his concept, is giving folks easier access to investment management. So there are companies out there that understand the business impact on design. I think those related disciplines that we need to interface with, they probably went to business school. So they're looking at those business metrics. And what I would suggest is that design metrics have not caught up, right? Like we're still trying to figure out, how do you evaluate good design? Kathy and I were chatting a few minutes ago about measuring the user experience. And there are some companies out there, one based in Denver, but that measurement is hard. It's qualitative. I don't know. I don't know how to do it. At Morningstar, what we're trying to do is just make an initial start on measuring usability. And there's kind of this framework I have in my mind where it's like, there's this foundational layer. There is where it's like, is the tech stack ready? Then there's the user layer, like are you providing functionality to the user? Then is it usable? And then if you got a usable piece of software, you're ahead of the game, right? Like you're like, yay, we're better than the competition. But what we're striving for is desirable and meaningful, right? And how do you measure something that's desirable? That's really hard. Like the best business metric is NPS, Net Promoter Score. But really that's the whole experience of the company. And you're like, I don't know. So I think that's where the gap is.
It's an interesting conversation because, you know, in our prior open hour conversations, when we've talked to UX people, they really talk about, you know, the design component, and they're very, very passionate about the design. And the transition that we're having in this conversation, which is kind of interesting, is sort of how do we locate UX and design within a business context, right? Because whenever we're dealing with the software and software design, we're presumably doing it for some business reason, right? And so this is an interesting conversation. And for those folks on the call, I think this is a really interesting thing and an important thing for us to be thinking about in the field, because I know, for example, in courses that I teach, courses that we have in our program, you know, we don't really talk about UX or tech comm in the context of business needs. And so my question to you is something like, how do you make the argument, right? How do you make the argument now for increasing your budget, for increasing the number of people who work in your operation, for spending money on professional development? How do you make these arguments in a business context for what it is that you do and what you contribute? What do you think, Kathy? We'll go to Kathy first.
Don't have that one solved by any means. But I think trying to translate what we're doing into things that matter, like, for example, like NPS we use at our company, looking at other types of measures, not beyond just NPS. Because I mean, NPS is NPS. I mean, it is what it is, and it's reliable. I think there's a lot of studies around that, but it isn't everything. And I don't think it should be everything. But how can we tie that into, how can we really measure sentiment in terms of the experience people have with our products? Like how much effort does it take to do something? That's a measure we're looking at, like an effort, a type of an effort metric or score. But in terms of convincing the business, I think I've had the most success when I've been able to convince my product and leadership to come and participate in research with me. And then they see it, because you can get so far removed, and like, you know, my product leaders have roadmaps and they've got their prioritization and they're trying to figure out, you know, we only have so many development hours and we have to figure out, what do we do now? You know, what do we do next? We know there's an opportunity to fix all kinds of things, but we don't have time or budget to do all of it. So they're trying to prioritize. But having them come and see, like feel the user's pain, like watching somebody do something. And then they realize, okay, maybe I can't quite put a finger on this exactly in terms of a number, but I see that there's a value. And I think that's a step. So, but it's not always easy to get them to come. Like I invite them and say, please come, please come. You know, you'll see so much benefit from it. And then on their priority list, another meeting gets bumped over and they don't come. So.
No, even when we offer them M&Ms, they don't come. What's up with that?
I don't know. But when they do,
Maybe you need to offer them peanut M&Ms, Brian.
maybe. Snickers or something better.
No, the way I think about it is there's three different layers as a design manager that I'm always thinking about. There's the strategy, or kind of like the delivery of the design, the product, whatever it is. Then there's people, and you were asking about headcount and that sort of thing, Sean. And then there's process. I think what Kathy was alluding to in using that framework is the strategy layer, where what we're trying to do is demonstrate how design execution impacts the business. And that's where it's fuzzy, right? Like that's really, really fuzzy unless you can get them in the room where they see the user struggle. And even then it's like, oh, did we pick, the 10 users that happen to struggle with this? What about our larger population, right?
Yeah.
So I
Throwing
think
it away.
right. Yeah.
Those are just the dumb users, right?
Right. And they're very real concerns, but I think that, it is a insight that we have to act on, and we need to understand better and measure, in whether you're using Google Analytics or something else. On the people side, it's really easy if you have the right tooling in place. If you're doing timekeeping, designers hate to keep time. My current company, we don't keep time. And I'm like, oh, I wish I went back to consultancy. I hated timesheets and consultancy. But what they did really well is they showed that, hey, we have more work than our design team can handle. And then you could make an argument that the business would understand. They're like, oh, right, everybody's working 20 hours a week more than they should, unless you work for certain large companies. Then they would be like, okay, we're going to invest in additional headcount. We can gain more revenue. Yay, more revenue. Then there's the process side. And I think it's a discipline, and design, UX, technical communication. We're really interested in the way things work, the way we apply our work, the way we work, the way we engage with the others, the way we collaborate. We write so much about this. Other disciplines are not as passionate about process. So when we start arguing, like, we need to do it this way or that way, they're like, can we just ship it? Those are where the arguments are really, really hard, where you're trying to change the structure. You often have to demonstrate how that change outside of the system works before you can actually affect the actual system itself.
It's interesting when you talk about oh, just ship it. I've done some work with some startups, as you guys probably know, and in startups it's ready, fire, aim. Right? It's like you do stuff, you launch stuff, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Then we'll come back and we'll tweak it, and we launch it again, and we come back. And it sounds like in larger companies, like where you two work, you have a much more structured process.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I would say sometimes as well.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it is that. Just get it. We committed to this. We're going to get it out the door. And yeah, we'll come back later. Well, yeah, that come back later. We'll come back. UX debt, all of the stuff that we know that was wrong to begin with. Yeah, really, really hard to go back and do anything about it. And then it turns into, well, we're going to sunset this product anyway, so let's just put our energy into the next thing. And it's just this vicious cycle.
I love that you brought that up, Kathy. I've experienced that so many times. You can just see it's grown. The designer in a room does not even have to say anything. As soon as a product owner or an engineer says, we'll come back to that, they're like, oh, that idea is dead.
Yeah. Come back to it. Never. It's going to the graveyard. Going to the graveyard. Something will happen. It won't be a priority anymore. And yeah, those are the times that when you work in UX that make you want to cry. Like, can we please get back and fix some of this? But there's always a reason. And I get it, but to a certain extent, but at the same time, it can get frustrating, when you think, I know that this is a pain point. If we could just fix it. It sounds simple, but it isn't as simple when you have so many different people and priorities and budget and everything in play. What sounds really straightforward in your head and makes sense in your head loses sense the more all the different factors that get pushing on it. And it goes off to the graveyard.
Very cool. Let's transition a little bit. I want to hear about sort of a day in the life of each of you. So we've talked a little bit about sort of the larger context you're working in, how you arrived where you are. So what do you do, right, in a regular day? I mean, what's a regular day? And I understand that Monday might look very different from Friday, but what's a regular day look like for you, Brian?
Oh boy, on the spot. So a regular day is usually getting up pretty early, getting on my computer with some coffee, and that's my quiet time from like 6 to 9 a.m. That's where I can actually do what most of us think of as work, right? Like I'm producing an Excel sheet from some other executive. I might be doing a presentation. I might be reviewing some of the notes of my team and just starting to comment on some of their work in Figma. Then I go into meetings, and that goes till about 6 p.m. So I think that, my daily life is very different now than what it is from a practice designer, because I'm more just a general leader. And what I'm trying to do is understand priority, risk, alignment across teams, and then raise that up. Also, while trying to provide what little creative direction I can in those 3 hours early in the morning through Figma comments. And that's why hiring is so important to me. I have to have the right set of designers under me that can actually be in the day-to-day directing junior designers' work. Luckily, I have a really good team that's able to do that. But that's my day-to-day really is sitting in meetings and then coming out and going like, okay, who do I need to connect? Who needs to talk to each other so we can reach our goals? Very different than what it was at the beginning of my career as a designer.
Yeah, my days are different too. I'm kind of new, I mentioned in the role that I'm in right now, but so my day to day right now is mostly in the morning. Like Brian said, the early morning tends to be the quiet. A lot of people aren't in the office or online yet. I'm work remotely. And so that's I'm recruiting because I'm running research sessions. I've pretty much been running either usability tests or user interviews every week since I started almost. So in the morning, I'm recruiting, I'm checking to see, do I have enough people lined up for things I have coming, reminding people. And then I'm going into either a usability test or an interview and facilitating that. I'm facilitating maybe 3 or 4 sessions a day, probably 3 or 4 days a week at least. And then trying to analyze that in between. And then I also have surveys out at the same time. So I'm checking to see, am I getting the number of responses I need on a survey? And okay, can I pull this down? Can we go ahead and close it? Is that enough? Or so taking survey results and trying to present them back, taking all of the stuff that I'm getting in these user interviews or usability tests, trying to look for those patterns and then spit it back out as quickly as I can to the team, because I invite them to come to sessions, but they don't always come. They kind of want I get it. They want the Cliff Notes version. So, and I try to do as many video clips as I can, because I can say the user struggled to figure out didn't understand this, but it's so much more powerful when you can watch somebody clicking like the wrong thing and continuing to click the wrong thing and saying, I'm clicking over here. Can you see, that's more powerful. So then I spend the in-between time going through the transcript, trying to find the time, and then I cut the audio clip, and then I stick it in a wiki and send out the link and say, hey, please go look at this to communicate that out. So my days are a little bit of a lot of different things.
And so Kathy, are you actually designing tests?
Yes.
You're more on the research side than the
Yeah.
design side. And Brian, it sounds
Yeah.
like you're more on the design side than the research side.
I oversee research as well, so it's hard to make that split, but yes.
Okay.
I'm very much more tactical. At one point I was 50-50 split design and research, but now it's almost all. Now it is exclusively research that I'm
And
focused on.
so
Awesome.
what are we gonna say, Brian?
It's awesome that your company is investing in user research specialization like that.
I'm the first. They were doing research before I came, but nobody was dedicated to research. So I'm it right now, dedicated.
And so have you had some challenges, Kathy, in, being the team of one, especially in COVID? And I do want to talk a little bit about COVID because, this changed the world. I mean, I'm here having a meeting in Lindsay and Blake's house, for example, talking to the two of you. So how has that impacted your work? I mean, even being a shop of one plus being remote, completely remote.
For me, I mean, being a shop of one is challenging because there is so much potential for research we could be doing. And even if there were 3 of me, we couldn't get to it all. So, and I'm still new to the company. So I'm still learning our products. And, you get in research sessions with people and they naturally ask you questions like, hey, how do I do this? And I think, I don't know what to tell you because I don't even know. I'm asking you questions about things I don't even understand just yet, but I'm still learning. So that part of it is tough from just a capacity perspective. I have to try to prioritize what can I do and what is going to have to go because you can't keep up with it. And the administrative piece of it is really hard, like scheduling, and you schedule sessions and people have stuff come up and they don't show up and you have to hang around just in case they're late and then you have to drop. And so that's fun. And we can't go, I think at one point our company or some of the designers I work with could go on site to provider, like medical provider offices and observe. And that's limited. I mean, we can't do that right now. So I'm trying to interview somebody about how they handle a process and get them to tell me as much as they can about what they're doing. They can't really show it to me because it's got protected health information. They can't pull up their system and just show me stuff for that reason. So it's really challenging. If I were in an office, I could take notes and I could still see it potentially if we had sign off for that, but I can't do that, digitally for privacy reasons. So it's a lot harder to try to get people to explain in detail what they're doing not everybody does that very well. And it's really hard to ask those questions. So are you printing that out and are you going down the list that way? Or is it an accordion file? Or how many monitors do you have? It's a lot of different types of questions you have to ask when you can't really see what they're doing. And that's a big limitation.
Kathy, we also have one researcher on a different business unit than the one that I lead. And we expect our designers to do a lot of their user research. One of the things so my former role before I took this one was around design operations, which is a new upcoming discipline of design. It's all about the things that make teams run rather than doing the design work. And one of the things that I saw in that role is the administrative tasks related to research. They take an enormous amount of time, everything from like scheduling and recruiting, like you said, but also like getting your templates in order and like basically operationalizing the process of research so that your specialists like you can spend the time actually talking to customers or buyers, right?
Yeah.
I'm just curious, has that come up in your new role? And
yeah.
if so, how are you guys thinking about tackling that?
It has. And my boss is great. She knows, she recognizes this is a challenge. It was a challenge even more so when the designers were doing their own research because they were like splitting their role like in a bunch of different ways. Right. So that's part of what I think she's put into the budget, and I'm crossing my fingers we can add somebody next year that can help, especially with that operational piece, because the beginning, trying to get things scheduled, being new and figuring out what tools I had available. And it spent probably like at least half my week trying to schedule sessions. And, that's important, but that was X amount of hours I couldn't spend actually either running sessions or in analyzing sessions, which is the part that takes the longest. And I have to fit into random spots of time in my calendar. It's harder to do it that way. So yeah, it's something we're working on, but I'm fingers crossed budget wise, we can get some help.
This is interesting also. I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I'm just smiling because like, as we're seeing this trend of designers to go back towards generalists, the things around designers are specializing, right? Like there's user researchers, but there's also user research operations, design operations. So there's like these program management things that are happening around designers because those, maybe it's easier skill sets to fill and the business understands that better than they understand how visual design or UX design.
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, that operational piece is big because there's even parts of it I haven't touched that I used to work for TSIS and financial services, and a big piece of, we were trying to get a new tool. We wanted a tool vendor to help make our research easier. But we had to go through this whole vendor review process, and through vendor review, we found out that, well, there's all this privacy concern we have to think about. So how can we, that's something that I'm not really sure. That's something I have to think about too. Like if people say they want to do research with us and be contacted as like a member of our panel, well, do I have a process in place for them to say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore? Like take me off your list. Like we have to be able to respect that. But managing that, just, it makes my head spin trying to think about how I'm going to keep up with this over time, because it's not just as simple. I mean, like privacy is huge. You want to make sure that I'm keeping their information confidential and I'm not spamming them and I'm not getting in their spam box because I send too many emails and things like that too. So lots of things I never would have thought about before, but that are really important.
Do you two see an increasing investment in the type of work you're doing? And I ask this question partly because we had a relationship with a company here in Denver from our university, and in 2020, spring of 2020, they completely closed the UX shop, completely closed it. And that was sad because it was a great relationship. But before they closed, I had lots of conversations with them, and they had people who were schedulers and people who ran the meetings, and they had designers. And I know that they're beginning now to ramp that up again. And so I'm curious if in the last 2 or 3 years, you've seen a similar pathway where UX, research, operations, product design, all of these things that you're talking about, did they decrease and are they on the uptick again?
I think it has to do more with the economic climate than anything. I think everybody kind of paused and slowed down and said, what is going on with the world? At Morningstar, we certainly did. We slowed down our hiring. We didn't stop hiring. We slowed it down. And we're really thoughtful about what roles do we need to be successful over the near term. And then, we're not out of the pandemic by any means, but just thinking about how many roles I have on my team and how many we've hired. In the last 4 months, I've hired 4 people and I have 5 open roles. So I think it's on the uptick, but part of that uptick is also because we delayed hiring earlier. So it's hard to say. It might have stayed on the same trajectory if the pandemic didn't happen. I don't know.
The curve is just steeper.
It's just steeper.
So you're hiring 5 people in 5 months instead of 5 people over 12 months.
Right. Something like that.
Yeah, I think the administrative piece, not just over the last couple of years, but even just when I was working at TSIS, when I first started, that was my very first job. So that was 16 years ago. We had just a lot of administrators, like a lot of administrative assistants, a lot of people there to help. And then over time, by the time I left, there was very few. Everything, it was kind of more like, we'll give everybody their own self-service tools. Like I used to have to book a conference room through an admin, but then not anymore. Like they opened it up, made it available to everybody. And I think that administrative role corporately, at least in my experience, kind of shrunk. And then Brian's giving the thumbs up. Yeah, I wondered if it happened other places too. But now on like the design ops and research ops side, I think, I don't know, it's just I don't know if it's one of those things that naturally expands and contracts. Like then you end up hiring too many admins and then you look for places to cut and then you cut them back down again. I don't know, but I've heard like 3 years ago, research ops, I don't even know if I would have heard about it yet. Not very much, but it's becoming more known, and all the aspects of design and research ops, because it's expensive to pay a designer to spend, or a researcher, half their time scheduling stuff. So I think you'll have I don't know that I have an answer. It just feels like I don't know if it's going to go the same way as like general administrative in a company or not.
It seems like it could, but it seems like it's on the uptick on the operations side of things at the moment. And part of that could be, it's really hard to hire designers. It's really hard to hire user researchers right now. those jobs are in demand.
Yeah, I know that you guys, or at least Brian, I know you know Carl Sargent, and we were talking offline one day, and she couldn't hire people in New Orleans for like, I don't know, 120 grand. She couldn't find people. People were turning her down. And to do UX or to do that was more on the design side, which I thought was absolutely remarkable that was the case. And so I know that as a field, it's growing and expanding. One of the things I'm really interested in this conversation is all of this stuff that we don't think about, right? And so when we teach and we have younger students and new professionals, they think I'm going to be a designer, and they forget that you might be a designer for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And then after 15 years, like the two of you, they step into roles where they have to start thinking about what are the politics of an organization? What are the values of an organization? How do I manage hiring? How do I make budget requests? And none of this stuff we've been trained for, right? I mean, this is just stuff that you kind of evolve into. And, and it's an interesting thing for us to think about on the academic side is how do we prepare younger people, newer people to step into these types of roles, at least to have some sort of basic foundation in management, administration, operational management, not just designing, right? Because this whole conversation for the last 30 minutes has been about not really about design and UX, but all of this other stuff around it, which is really valuable, and certainly for me to hear. And I think it's valuable for our students to hear as well, because no, Dr. Williams, I'm just going to be a designer. Well, maybe, but maybe not.
I mean, I don't know how you feel, Kathy. Like, and I don't know what the program is like at Colorado Springs, but going back to our time together at Clemson, I think the rhetoric class was key for me because it taught me to really focus on people and what motivates people and how to communicate to people so that they do things. So I still reference that. There is the organizational systems or change class that I took with you, Sean, that was super helpful in thinking about organizational dynamics and how to drive people around. So I think like your perspective on the class, like when I was in that, am I gonna ever use rhetoric? When am I ever gonna use this? And it hits you like 5-10 years down the line that like, oh, that's why they had me read that really boring book and do those assignments, right? Like,
you realize, oh, I'm doing this. I have been doing this. I didn't realize. I don't know that I would have realized it, but I do this all the time.
Yeah.
And for those out there in Zoom land, I'm not compensating Brian and Kathy for saying that. Just to be clear.
No, and we've been saying it for years. I think, Brian, every time we catch up, we talk about our time in school. Like, yep, rhetoric.
Yeah,
rhetoric.
Use it all the time.
Sometimes I just give Aristotle shout outs and my coworkers have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You just start speaking Greek, right? And start talking about Greek, using Greek words. One thing I'm interested in hearing about is like your best day ever. What's your, I mean, that's a hard question, right? Because hopefully you haven't had your best day ever yet in your life, in your career. But just tell us a little bit about like one that just pops into your mind about the best day ever of work. Go ahead, Kathy.
I think to date, maybe, there's been a lot, but to date it kind of combines, I was an instructional designer building a course, a really detailed course on how a system at TSIS works. And part of this was kind of the beginning of my transition into UX and away from instructional design was like, let's put this in front of some people that actually need to take this. So we did a usability test on it and I was facilitating. We had 2 people, said it again, users, you just can't help it. 2 people that were at a client that work in this, like they set up all the options and decide how our system is going to work for their cardholders. This is credit card business. So I had 2 people from the same company. One was very experienced. He'd been there forever, and a newer person. And I had them in my course, looking around, taking it, watching some of the, animations and all this instructional content we had in there. And he stopped and he said, he goes, I'm really jealous. He goes, because he said it took me years to figure out that, like, to understand some of this stuff. And he goes, and she's going to learn it, like right away. She's only been there a few months or something. And I thought, okay, because it made me feel like what I did mattered, and I got to see it matter. And that's the part that you don't always get to see. You're not always there to see that, oh, wow, this is great kind of, moment. And of course it wasn't perfect. There was a lot of other things we could have changed, but for that was just, feeling like the work that I did is going to help somebody. And it's really simple, but that was just awesome to hear him say that. So that's what the first thing that popped into my head.
Sure. How about you, Brian?
It was really like the first thing that popped in my head was like, best day ever. That's tough. And I think it was tough because I like a lesson I've learned along the way, and something that they don't teach you in school, and maybe this is just highly motivated person speaking. There is no destination, right? So like for me, it was like, oh, when I first became head of design or whatever, you get to that point and then you're like, oh, okay, well, what's next? Anyway, just trying to think through, like, the destination is not the result. So as a designer, if you're really, really happy in making things, stay on that path. If you're really happy about people, go into management, because that's your job. It then, like, as Kathy was talking, I was like, my best day ever is when somebody who used to work with me, for me, writes me out of the blue and says, hey man, are you hiring? I'm thinking about making a switch, or do you know anything? Or occasionally, I've gotten a few, like, just little LinkedIn messages or a card. And when a former employee writes me, that's my best day ever. Like, I get so excited with that connection.
Yeah. So the people, because one of the things I'm hearing between both of you, it's about the people. And so this word people has come up a whole bunch of times, right?
It's all about people.
Yeah.
It's all about the people. And I think that this is an important thing, because there's lots of different tools that we use. I mean, how many different prototyping softwares have we used? How many different design softwares, products have we used in the last 15 or 20 years, right? But the one consistent thing among all of that is the people. It's the people. And, it's useful to learn how to use Figma. And for those of you who don't know Figma, don't worry about it. You'll encounter it when you go out and get your job, maybe, if it hasn't gone away in the next 2 years, or hasn't been, supplanted by whatever is next. But it's about the people and thinking about people. And I think that's one, for me, in our field. Of course, I'm on the academic side, not the professional side. And of course, when you're in the instructional side, it's definitely about the people, for sure. But even as a field, when I do consulting work, or I work with companies, I spend a lot of time talking about people. So thank you both for bringing that up. And, that leads me to a question about, what do you look for when you hire people? Because, this open hour that we do is designed to help our students understand a little bit, and some of our faculty as well understand, how should we be preparing people, and how should people who are interested in working in instructional design, user experience, design ops, all of these things we're talking about, how should they prepare? So what do you look for when you hire? Go ahead, Brian.
It's changed a little bit over the years. And I think what's been challenging for me lately, hiring people right out of school, is portfolios are starting to all look the same. Like, it used to be easier to identify the designers that really understood the design process, really understood how to communicate and not only understand the people they're designing for, but to bring stakeholders along with the business. There's been some kind of like cookie cutter thing going on where I now have to interview people where I could have probably screened them out easier, maybe 5-10 years ago. But in those conversations where what I'm looking for is the thinking, the approach, and the understanding of who they're designing for and the business. It all comes down to, like, viability, feasibility, and desirability. And where do you fit in that spectrum as a designer? Do you understand the business, or have you shown an aptitude for understanding a new business, like how have you progressed? Desirability, what are your chops? Like, are you a wireframer? Are you a visual designer? Or are you a user researcher? And then I can't remember which one I'm missing. The customer side, how do you understand your customers? What user research have you practiced? How do you bring that in? And I think what I'm seeing from, in particular, some of those boot camp programs is they gloss over the process. So it gets to that UX is theater. What I want to understand is, what have you done to really understand, particularly coming out of school, technical constraints? Like there's all these like really cool ideas. Ideas are cheap. Every day we have 1,000 ideas. Can you actually work with constraints? That's what I look for.
That's interesting.
Very good.
Go ahead, Kathy.
I want to come work for you, Brian.
We're hiring.
I don't hire, but I have been involved in, I mean, I'm not a hiring manager. I'm not a people leader. And I think it's okay to be okay with that. And I'm not interested in doing that, at least at this point. I don't rule anything out, but I have, we've been in team interviews and, interviewed different designers and different people for different roles. And I think what stands out to me, like Brian was saying, you need to demonstrate that you understand who you're building something for. And that is the people, like we keep talking about. But then to Brian's point, it can't all be about the people, because that's not the only person you can consider about. You have to think about the business people too, and what matters to them. And, show your enthusiasm for what you're doing. It doesn't mean you have to be outgoing, but I think when you genuinely care about something, you can tell, even if you're not a naturally outgoing, bubbly person, like I'm not. But that comes across when you're talking, and let that come across. I want to see how much you care about what you do. And then also be able to be able to tell a story and explain something, and like connect not just what you did, but why you did it, and connect it back to those people like we talked about. Be able to communicate those stories and examples really well in the process that you had. It's not so much about, I made this wireframe, or I have this research plan, or I have this research deliverable. Okay, I mean, not that that isn't interesting, but I really feel like, why did you do it this way? And how did you get here? And what went into it? I think when we've had people interview with portfolios, they think, oh, it looks nice, and that's what's most important. Not really. And are you adaptable? Because I work in corporate, we work on a lot of things that are not consumer facing. So it's not necessarily flashy. You might be building a bunch of forms in an existing design system or an existing design pattern. And you might not be able to say, I really want rounded buttons, or I like ghost buttons. I mean, that's kind of like off the table. You have to work within those constraints. Like you're saying, Brian, can you still do that and feel like you are still satisfied, like working within that when you don't have an empty slate? Because most of the time you're not coming in and you have a blank slate and you get to make all those design decisions. A lot of them are already made and you have to work within them. And not everybody likes to do that. So if you're going to work someplace like that, you have to be okay with that. And yeah, I'm going to build a form.
So
Cool.
you made me think of two things, Kathy, while you were saying there. Like, as a design leader who cares deeply about other designers, I really think that all designers should try to work in an agency and in-house, because there's experiences. As a in-house person, you're going to experience what Kathy and I are talking about, designing for the enterprise and working within these large constraints, design systems, technical constraints. As an agency side, you're going to learn process really, really well, because you're going to have to deliver like 30 projects a year, right? So like you're going to just start to pick that up, and that's where you can exercise a little bit more creativity. The one thing that I just want to be clear, one of your main stakeholders is engineering. That's the team that has the most power for UX designers. And you need to understand what motivates your engineering team so that it can actually get built. Because if it doesn't get built, it doesn't exist. It's just some theoretical thing. So understanding your engineers and finding those partners, that's people that really, really matters in the business context.
I like this focus on process. I really think this is what I'm hearing from both of you. And I also like this idea of adaptability. And
Yeah.
One of our faculty members teaches a course called Technological Adaptability. It's actually in the title of the course, right? And I like this idea of constraints as well, because because it is real. It's real that and if we had to create a theme for our conversation today, I think constraints might be part of the theme, right? Because we've talked about business constraints and people constraints and process constraints and technological constraints, all of these different things that we work within. And how do you make a life and a career that's satisfying? And so, Brian, your little bit of wisdom there on work in an agency for a while, because you're really going to learn the process. But then working in an environment, a corporate environment, where you're going to have a lot more constraints. And so in Colorado Springs, a lot of our folks will end up in the Department of Defense ecosystem. Talk about constraints.
Yeah.
Right. and so there's pretty limited creativity when you're creating a technical order for the Air Force. There's not a lot. So it's a useful thing to think about. I want to end with one last question for each of you. And you can answer this both in terms of what's next for you in your path, or what's next for the profession. So you've been doing this a long time, and you can see an arc both professionally. So you can answer that in either way. I'm just curious, what's next for you in your path? And does that dovetail with what's next for the field? Or do you just want to talk about what's next for the field? Kathy, what do you think?
I think, and I mentioned this before everybody had joined, like professionally, it's just, you're never done. There's always something to learn. So for me professionally, it's trying to fill in some of the gaps in experience and knowledge that I haven't had before, in quantitative analysis and quantitative statistic, that type of thing. I never took a statistics class before, and I wish I had. But then the job I've had before, we never really had any numbers. So it really didn't matter. We would get 30 people take a survey. So it's not, I know it's not statistically significant, so I didn't worry about it, but I have more access to more people now. So I'm trying to build that skill set up. But I think that I see that a little bit in the UX research field too. They really like mixed method researchers. You can't just be, I don't know, one trick pony and only do usability testing. Like you have to be able to take data from different places, like heuristics, like you were mentioning, heuristics and qualitative data and quantitative data from usability tests, and you have survey data and interview data. Being able to take all of that and keep up with it in your organization over time and keep those patterns alive, I think is becoming more and more important in the field. And I'm personally trying to build up my skill sets so that I'm ready for it.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned statistics. I cannot tell you over the last 15 years how many times that's popped into my head too. Like, oh, I spend so much of my life in Excel. I wish I was better at this. You really do spend a lot of time as a UX designer in Excel. It's surprising, I know. Where am I going in my career? I think, I just took a new position about a week ago, and I think, in the near term, it's helping that business understand how to get the most out of the design team. It's similar, but it's different, because as Kathy said, you're always learning. I'm working with a completely new set of stakeholders, a new subject matter, and that has me really excited. What we're trying to do is just this really interesting problem where we're trying to provide advisors more control and personalization for their investors. And I think that's a really interesting concept. So that's what I'm excited about in my profession. Where's the field going? I don't know. Like, I'm starting to see like convergence between design and product that has me interested, because I think in some ways they're siblings, but they are different roles. I don't know. I don't know where we're going.
I guess
we'll find out when we're there.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the main thing is, if you don't know where you're going, you just have to adapt and evolve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just figure it out as you go. Well, we're about at an hour, and I hope the two of you will stick around after I stop the recording for just a second. But I want to thank both of you, Brian Verhoeven and Kathy Jeep, for talking with us for about an hour. There was no questions in the chat, so I'm guessing that you either dazzled our audience or scared them. I'm not sure which. But thank you all very much for attending today. And thank you, Brian and Kathy, for spending time with us. And I hope that you will not be strangers to our program.
Anytime.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah.
Okay.